suicide rates will continue to rise after the pandemic. As horrible as it sounds, they will. I think that mental health referrals will continue to rise. I think that more men will be, so this is the good thing about the negative, more men will be admitted and have problems officially.
Yeah.
And that's a good thing, because there's this unknown stat that never gets posted because it's not really a stat. But when we talk about 75% of suicides being men, that's a stat that is like hard and fast. But when you look at things like depression, and you look at things like postnatal depression, or you look at things like anxiety, and you say, well, what's the split of men and women that have been diagnosed with this? It's always more women than men.
Yeah.
But you can guarantee that there's more men that are suffering that aren't there. And actually, if you're experienced in this, or you experience it on a level of reality of day to day, so if you have these problems and you're aware of people who have these problems and you can see it, so like me and like other people who are aware of it, I sit there sometimes in groups with my friends and I think 3 out of them 5 have got deep anxiety. They're showing so many symptoms of their anxiety. They're not diagnosed. Do you know what I mean? And it's like, I just think that what this will show, unfortunately, because it'll force them to go and get help, it'll show that more men have more mental health problems than we all thought. And hopefully it'll lead to both sexes at the back end of this in a few years' time. All our mental health will be on and up, because it'll force governments, not just ours, it'll force governments into funding this properly. It'll force them into making change to policies and to medications, and to create more services and to fund more services, so that we can all help each other. It's a slippery slope when they don't do it, because before you know it, we're a raging sort of beast that can sort of fight back a little bit. So I mean, that's going off on a different tangent altogether, but I really do think that eventually there'll be a positive. I do think there will be a positive.
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, the suicide stats for me I lost a very good friend of mine to suicide when we were 21.
Jeez.
It was crippling at the time. It was one of the worst things I've ever been through. And the fact that 125 people a week still kill themselves and rising is a frightening stat. I mean, I'm raising money for Calm this year. We mentioned this previously, and I was just watching a video of theirs where I may have made this number up, but it was very similar. 400,000 people called their helpline last year, and they say that they stopped 488 people killing themselves. So the work that they're doing over there is just phenomenal. I know you mentioned that you've raised some money for them in the past.
I've done a few fundraisers for it. I think they're amazing what Calm are doing. So if anybody listening or watching this doesn't know what Calm are, it's Campaign Against Living Miserably. And Campaign Against Living Miserably stands for what it is. They are a massive campaign to stop people from living miserably to the point where they see no other option. Suicide needs a makeover, because I think people still feel that suicide is this horrific, selfish thing. And I did up until a few years ago. I'm guessing that by the fact that you've been touched by it, you had kind of your own education of it, unfortunately, which I'm sorry you had to go through. But from my point of view, up until very, very recently, a few years ago, I very much thought that anyone committing suicide was only thinking about themselves and didn't think about everybody who they'd leave behind, etc., etc. All the old stereotypes.
Yeah.
In actual fact, it's the complete opposite. They think they're doing everyone a favour. They think that they're helping everyone. Yeah, that they're eradicating a problem by getting rid of themselves. And that is the ultimate extreme. It is the ultimate extreme. It's the only end point where everything else has failed them. And in a lot of suicide cases, nothing has even been attempted. Nothing has been attempted to help because of lots of factors. Without knowing the stats, there are lots of different reasons. And in some cases, it's going back to what we were saying about the societal, cultural problems of men and actually just not really ever having any iota of strength to even seek help. and it only being the only way out. Suicide's horrendous, but it needs a makeover. The whole phrase "commit suicide," do you know that comes from Victorian crime? That's an actual crime. People used to commit suicide, and their families would have fines because they committed suicide. Wow. It's horrendous. It shouldn't even be called that. That's why you hear now quite a lot in the press. You hear that people say they died by suicide, or they were their family is affected by suicide, and someone was killed by suicide. Because suicide essentially is a psychological problem. It's a psychological output. It's not it's a disease. It's something that is a disease that kills people. It's like cancer. It's not an action. It's not a committing. You don't make a problem out of it. It's horrendous. So what a sour tone. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say, like you have had many messages from men who have been through it. Some that have tried to commit suicide. In fact, I've got one guy on tomorrow night who's going to talk about that, and he tried to take his own life during the first lockdown. So it's a very real problem that we need to highlight, and like you say, maybe just changing the word in that commit is just changing that initially to something different.
It's a massive start, and I think Calm do a lot of that. They try and a lot of their marketing, Calm's marketing, is around highlighting why people do it and why it gets to that stage. And if we can all normalize it, we don't want to normalize it to a point where it's an acceptable thing. What we want to do is we want to normalize it to a point where we understand that we're all human and we're all capable of that feeling. I am not ashamed to say this, and it is something that I haven't experienced firsthand until very, very recently. But a few months ago, I had those thoughts. I had horrible thoughts like that about something that happened, and it was a very small incident that just sent me over the edge to a point where I actually thought about crashing my car. And it was a really tough couple of days for me. And I reached out to people and I spoke about it. I reached out to people who I knew had been through it, who I knew had got to that point and actually come back from that ledge, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Then I shed a lot of tears. I explained why I felt the way I felt. I told my wife, which was really hard. And she understood. She tried to understand as best she can why I felt that way, as much as she didn't agree or think that it was something that I should be feeling. She understood that I can feel it, and that's all we need. That's all anyone needs. That understanding that we're capable of having that darkness. We are human. Accept it. The world needs to accept it. Men and women need to accept that all of us, men and women, can feel that way. And when we accept it, we can then make change to help each other. We can then go, okay, you felt that way. I'm sorry you felt that way. Let's look into how I can help you, even if it's something that all you need is just me to listen to you. Do you know what I mean? It's like, until you accept it, there's always going to be barriers, and those barriers will push people to that kind of ledge, so there's no better way of really talking about it.